Hello and welcome back to another episode of Are You a Robot? This is a series where we aim to tackle some of the greatest challenges that you face when dealing with AI and related technologies. To do that, we bring on some of the cream of the crop in their respective fields, and we ask questions, stimulate discussion around best practices that have to do with AI ethics and AI governance. Speaking of discussion, we have started a Slack community to continue this conversation about best practices with some of the best and brightest minds. If you'd like to join, you can find the link to that below in the description. Hope to see you there and hear your voice, hear what you have to say around these topics. Last but not least, I want to give a big shout out to our sponsor, ESG benchmarking firm EthicsGrade. They specialize in technology governance, and we would not be here if it weren't for them. We wouldn't have the quality or caliber guests that we have on, and it just wouldn't be possible. So I want to say thank you to them. If you're interested in checking out what they do, you can also hit the link below and find out more information. All right, let's talk about our guest on the show today, Dr. Rob Wortham. He has returned to academia following a successful career in industry where he co-founded a software development company. Since returning to Bath in the United Kingdom in 2014, he has made significant contributions to the field of autonomous robotics, culminating in the publication of his recent book, Transparency for Robots and Autonomous Systems. And don't forget his appearance in the short film and documentary, The Age of AI. So, I can't wait for you to hear this conversation that we had with Rob about muttering robots. Without further ado, Dr. Rob Wortham.
Are you a robot?
So welcome everyone. We are here with another episode of the Are You a Robot podcast and video cast. Today I am joined by none other than Dr. Rob Wortham. He is a professor of AI and robotics at the University of Bath, and he also dives deep into AI ethics. Today we're going to be talking about muttering robots and what that entails. I am excited for you to be here, Rob. Thank you for joining us. I want to start off by asking you a question about how you managed to find yourself in the whole AI ethics space.
Sure. Well, thank you for your kind introduction, Demetrios. Very kind of you to have me on this podcast. So to answer your question, how did I get into this? So my background was in engineering originally. That was my first degree, and started building control systems and stuff, having finished my degree, and then set up a software company, which I ran for many years, and we built software in the travel space. So that was assistance for large tour operators and wholesalers and so on. However, having done that for many years, I felt I needed a change, needed to do something else. The company was running quite sweetly, and I wasn't essential to it anymore, really. So I started doing a PhD, and very quickly became extremely interested in this whole area of AI ethics. And I think the reason I became interested was because my supervisor was swinging over to having originally been a psychologist, doctor, professor now, Joanna Bryson, was originally a psychologist, became a computer scientist and a roboticist, and then after many years doing that, she started to become more interested and more active. I suppose she was always interested, but became much more active in this AI ethics space and robot ethics space. And so that became the topic of my PhD. My original topic was robot action selection. So what I tried to do was combine the challenge of how we get a robot to make an intelligent decision, which is what action selection is about. Okay, given the intended aims and goals of the robot and the current sensory input that the robot has, which action should it choose next? And that's a moment by moment problem. And a fascinating research area. But what I did in my PhD was to combine that with, and can we make those actions and the internal state and processing of the robot transparent in such a way that we can better understand the robot? So that was kind of how I got into this space, and then started to think about the ethical implications and the wider contribution of transparency to trust and responsibility and accountability and so on.
Yeah, and I think it's brilliant. There's so many things that we can dive into, and I want to get to kind of your work with Joanna, I think is what her name is. Sorry, and some of the things that she said, because I know she has some controversial opinions, we could say. But before we get into that, I was doing some research and watching videos that you've been in, and there's a mini documentary that you did a few years back, I think, and it was talking in the documentary. You said how difficult it is for a robot to navigate human environments, and that whole thing, I think, stems quite nicely with this idea of the decision making that robots come from. And can you just give us a bit more color around that and a little more detail?
Yeah, so I think we're going to have to talk about some evolutionary biology here. So the environment that we've constructed around ourselves, that environment is obviously, it's an artifact. It's something that we've built. It's a human built environment, but it's all part of the phenotype of being a human, right? It's an expression of our genes, and so we and our environment are very well adapted to work together, right? Because we've built an environment which and we've built it in accordance with a way that works really well for us. Okay, so we have good mental models of how to build home environments and how to navigate home environments, and then we have an extremely fine-tuned, high precision set of senses, right? Primarily eyesight, but people without eyesight navigate their own home perfectly well as well. So we've got hearing, we've got touch, we've got proprioceptive sensing, which means we can sense our own movements through space. We can determine our own joint angles. You know what position your body's in, even when your eyes are closed and you can't see it. You know whether you're upright or not. Okay, we've got these accelerometers in our heads, in our ears. So we've got a huge range of senses, which means we're very finely tuned and adapted and experienced for moving around in human environments. And it is extremely difficult to get robots to be able to replicate or simulate or in some other way be able to navigate in a human environment. In fact, the only way you can effectively do it is to start putting beacons into that environment and then providing maps in some sense.
Yeah, and it's like the robots are talking to each other in a way, and so they can understand what is where.
Yeah, certainly if you have multiple robots, they can all communicate with one another. Yeah, but you can also do this by just having fixed beacons in the room that allows a robot to accurately triangulate itself so it knows where it is relative to those beacons. I mean, there is this thing called SLAM, simultaneous location and mapping, which is where a robot senses its environment, moves around in that environment, and in the process of moving around makes a map and localizes itself inside the map. So it's doing those two things at once, which is why it's called
This would be
simultaneous
the typical
localization and mapping.
example of the vacuum cleaner that goes around your house, right? Or the lawnmower.
Well, interesting actually. Those early vacuum cleaners, they just had a random pattern, and so they didn't know where they were. It's just as long as you have some kind of random movement, eventually you cover the surface. Yeah. It's like those pool cleaning robots. You know, there's not any intelligence in those pool cleaning robots. They just turn left and right and up and down, and eventually they've cleaned the thing, right? So it's not very efficient, and it takes an awful long time until you get, you can quite never guarantee 100% coverage with that. But that's what those early vacuum cleaners did. And then they started to become more intelligent, so they could detect where the dirty parts of the carpet were, like where people walked, because they'd pick up a lot of information from sensors about dust particles, and then they'd keep in that area. So they would sort of stay in a dirty area until they felt it was clean enough to. So, I've been anthropomorphizing just there by saying until it felt it was clean enough.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult. So
What is
anyway, so that's
real
robots
fast?
moving
What is that
moving in
word
spaces.
that you just used? Maybe break it down for us.
Yeah. So anthropomorphizing is where we ascribe human traits and characteristics to non-human artifacts or life forms or animals, whatever. And we've always done that. We see faces in clouds. We talk about our car. She doesn't want to start this morning because it's cold.
Yeah.
We gender it immediately and give it some intentionality. We say it doesn't want to start. Obviously it doesn't have wants or needs. It's a car.
Yeah.
But it's built into our language to anthropomorphize, and we're so heavily cued by something moving intentionally in three-dimensional space, such as a robot, that we've got like these intentionality detectors in our brain that just detect this thing is decision making and moving. And as soon as we do that, we ascribe some level of intelligence to it and treat it as if it's human or in a human-like way. That's what anthropomorphism is.
And I think that segues nicely into one of the questions I wanted to ask you about the feelings that we have when we see the videos of people kicking around like the Boston Dynamic dogs or the robot dogs, and how it can evoke feelings inside of us that are like empathy, that we don't want them to do that. Although there is a part of our brain that knows it's just a robot. It doesn't care if it gets kicked around.
Yeah. I think there's two things going on there. The first thing is some people will worry about the robot and be concerned about the robot being suffering injury and harm and not liking it. So that's definitely anthropomorphization of the robot. Definitely that's what's happening there. I don't do that because I know it's a machine, but it still troubles me to see people behaving violently towards anything, really. I mean, knocking a statue over, for example, thinking of what happened in the Middle East with a lot of destruction of ancient statues and so on. It troubles me to see people behaving violently, and I think that's something else happening, which is that
interesting.
We have an innate bias, which means we don't like it when other people display violence. It troubles us when they do that.
That makes sense.
And I think that's probably a universal thing. One of the many universal things that all humans have is we don't want to. I don't want to see people behaving violently. I'm sure you don't.
Yeah, exactly. And so let's talk a little bit about the infatuation that us humans have with robots and these sentient robots. And I think you see it in pop culture. You see it from movies like Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever your favorite sci-fi film is. Or you see it in even, I was thinking about it, costumes in Halloween or in music too. There's this, I think about Daft Punk and how they make a robotic sound on the voice. And so there's this kind of infatuation that we have with it, but I'm not so sure why that is. And I'm wondering if you have an opinion on that.
I think there's a whole lot of things that come together in our culture and in our innate psychology that kind of result in this fascination. Certainly in Western culture, not so much in the East actually, but in Western culture, we have these ancient myths of building something and then it coming to life. I'm sure your listeners will know all of those, but the golem, the mudman story, the golem, Pygmalion, which is the Greek mythology about the guy that makes a sculpture and falls in love with it and wishes it would come to life. And one of the gods makes that happen, and the thing comes to life and kills him. So, and then of course we've got Shelley's Frankenstein. We've got the Terminator movies, et cetera, right? So there's lots of those things. So we've for thousands of years, literally thousands of years, been thinking about making things that then come to life. And perhaps that comes from the fact that we procreate, we make babies, right? Don't we? So we make something come to life. That's kind of a crude way to think about it. We come together, we do some work, and we make something come to life. And then that thing loves us, right? So and we love the thing. So we have this new bond. We've created something together, and now we love it, and it loves us, and that's very important to us.
Until they're teenagers.
So maybe that's what it is. Yeah, exactly. So we've always wanted to create things and breathe life into them in some way, and I think that's the part of the fascination with humanoid robots, that there is something sensible and scientific and engineeringly useful about the idea of humanoid robots, in that if we want them to move around the environments that we're in, well, the environments that we're in are designed for humans. They're not designed for wheeled robots. They're designed for things with legs and arms, because that's what they are, right? Think about, shopping malls and escalators and stairs at home and sinks and kitchens and cupboards. You need legs and you need arms, and you need something like that. So it doesn't need to be precisely human, but it needs to be probably humanoid. And it's probably a good idea if the sensors are on the top and something actuating on the bottom. And so that, again, that drives us towards building humanoid robots. I actually think that the most interesting and useful robots are generally to be deployed in places where humans can't go. That's what's really useful. So that might be space, that might be under the ocean, that might be in the confined spaces like pipes inside nuclear reactors, all of those kind of things, where we can build autonomous systems, robotic systems that can do useful work for us in places where we just can't go. And I have to say that that's what I focus on when I in my teaching with my master's students. We're looking at those kind of environments.
Those use cases.
Not building tabletop robots and not building, humanoid, socially interactive robots. We're building useful machines to do work.
Yeah, more impactful in a way. And I know that kind of touches on what you said in this documentary that I referred to at the beginning, on how if you had your choice, I think, and I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if I'm wrong, but your idea was something like, if you had your choice, you would like to just keep robots as tools and not try and go down the sentient route, or this kind of human consciousness in a robot route.
Yeah. Well, Joanna has a great phrase for this. Joanna says, we're obliged not to build machines that we would be obliged to. So what she's saying is, we ought not to build autonomous systems that are sentient or can feel pain, or in some way would then cause us to care about them more than their replacement value. I mean, obviously we care about our artifacts, right? But we shouldn't care about robots more than their replacement value. I care about my phone, but here's my phone. I back it up. My phone's all backed up. So if I smash it, I care about the cost of getting a new phone. But then I click a button, I restore the phone. It's like I've got it's like I've got the old phone back. And there's no reason why you can't do that with any kind of robotic AI system. People say, well, it's got a unique learning experience, but so's my phone. It's got unique data on it. I can back it up, right? So backing up is a thing that you should do. You should never have to feel you need to run back into a burning building to save a robot. You just buy a new robot, download the software, right? So that's if we start to build machines that we care about in some way, then we're opening a whole new can of worms about patiency, right? Making them moral patients, things that we have to care about for their own intrinsic value. And I can't see, having looked at this and heard the arguments from the opposing side, I still can't see a reason why that would be good for humanity to do that. Although I'm very interested in consciousness, I do have to say, and I actively participate in a group that's interested in consciousness and how we might understand it and so on. And so there is a tension there, because maybe at some point in the future we might build something that we felt was minimally conscious or had some sort of internal consciousness.
Yeah,
we're a long way away from that, but I think that's fascinating as a scientific experiment. But that brings its own moral challenges, right? Because if that became productionized, then we could start to build commercial machines that had some level of consciousness, whatever that was.
Yeah.
And that then becomes problematic.
Well, yeah, and I know there is speculation from some of the great minds out there that we're going to be able to download our consciousness onto robots, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah, I think that's pushing it very far. That's so that's taking the idea that we're a machine.
mhm,
Okay, the Cartesian idea after Descartes,
yeah,
that we're a machine, and that in some way the mind inhabits the machine, and therefore the mind could be extracted from the machine and put
yeah,
onto a different substrate, and therefore you could run a mind on a computer. And really you can't do that. We are wetware. We are what we are. You would need to have a complete reproduction of a human, the nervous system, the flesh, the blood, um, and all of those drives, right? Because we're flesh and blood, we have certain evolutionary drives
mhm,
because of what we are. And there's that wouldn't make any sense to have that in a machine.
mm,
Either downloading us or building a machine, it wouldn't have those drives because it wouldn't have had that evolutionary history.
yeah,
Um, and I'm afraid, when the brain shuts off, the person shuts off. There's nothing you can
yeah,
extract. There isn't any. It's a false Cartesian. It's this duality, this idea that the mind is something different from the
yeah. It's
brain.
based on a lot of assumptions, and
Yeah,
it is nice to think about. I think, and again, it goes back to like this human kind of urge that we want to push the boundaries and we want to look at things and see where
yeah,
we can take it. But uh, I'm
yeah, and also the quest for immortality as well.
mhm,
If we can escape our mortality, our fleshy wetness, and the fact that we decay and die, if we could escape that, we could become immortal.
yeah,
Either our offspring that we could become immortal, the children that we produce, our mechanical
yeah.
children could become immortal, or maybe we could transfer ourselves and become immortal. So it is the science fiction quest for immortality.
Mm. So now let's talk a little bit about the idea of uh, diving into these muttering robots and
Okay.
what exactly first when I first heard the term, I thought, what, that sounds crazy, like why would I want a robot to be talking and saying anything? And you can explain better what the idea is around muttering robots, but I think it was something that after I looked into it more and I heard the rationale behind it, it made more sense. So,
Okay.
yeah, can you talk about it a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Sure. So part of the research we were doing was um, seeing if people could better understand a machine, a complex machine with some intelligence in it, a robot, um, if we made available some information about the internal processing and state of that machine. So, not just observing the machine, seeing it in its environment, seeing the actions that it makes, but being able to take some information from inside the robot about why those decisions are being made, and display that to a user on a screen. And so we built some software, a software architecture to do that. I did work with colleagues to do that. And we did lots of practical experiments. We did video experiments and in-person experiments in the days where you could do in-person experiments. So we did in-person experiments at a science center with lots of non-specialist people who just were, I guess they were sort of interested in science, but it was a public place where you'd come and so we did that. Um, and I did these experiments internationally as well using Amazon's Mechanical Turk, which is a
Mhm.
very cool tool that allows you to get hundreds of people to interact with something very quickly. So so we did that, and what we found was that yes, absolutely, if people can see a display, it's not rocket science, is it? If some people can see a display of what's going on inside the machine when it's operating, uh, and it's a very simple graphical display, then they get a better idea of what the machine is, what its goals are, its intentions, what its capabilities are, what its limitations are, right? And they calibrate their understanding of the machine. The problem is you can't necessarily always have a display associated with the machine. There are lots of times where you don't want to do that, and it doesn't scale very well. So um, I came up with the idea of, well, could we take this stream of information that was flowing from the robot about its internal state and processing, and we called that a transparency stream, which actually you could take off using Wi-Fi. Can we take that information and generate an audio output from it, generate speech from it? Well, of course, it's always making decisions, so you end up with something that's muttering. And there was quite a complex mechanism for us to decide what it should mutter and what the sentences should be and which is the highest priority and various things. But so there's a paper about that if you're interested. But we built this system which meant that the robot, as it was going about its business, constantly told you why it was making the decisions that it was making and what it was trying to achieve. And so that's the muttering robot. And I had in my mind the idea of a robot that interacts with people, and when it interacts, it constantly mutters what it's doing. The human might be able to dial that up or dial that down. So the human might be able to say, I understand when you do that. You don't need to mutter about that anymore. Just mutter when you're doing something different to that. So you could start to build that in. And once you were happy that you understood what the robot was doing, you could just tell it to shut up, and it would stop that muttering. But if you then got confused about what it was doing, you could turn back on the muttering, and then you would understand it. So it's a simpler mechanism than a query and answer, okay? Because what you'd ideally like to do is say, why are you doing what you're doing? That requires quite a bit more computation. That's quite difficult because you have to break down the semantics of the statement that the question that you've generated, and then generate some kind of narrative explanation that makes sense. That's quite a difficult thing to do, but an easy thing to do is just to get the robot to constantly mutter why it's making the decisions it's making.
Say.
So that's the muttering robot. Yeah, and there's videos of that on the internet. Little robot buzzing around doing its muttering.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting also how you raised the issue that we are less prone to get angry with the robot when it starts making mistakes.
Yeah.
Because we understand it more.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. So we understand its limitations. One of the big problems of having non-transparent machines, opaque machines, is that we overestimate. We tend to overestimate, first of all, the range of sensory inputs, the sense they're making of the world, right? All the data that's coming in. We tend to imagine that robots have eyes and they can see objects and so on. That may well not be the case. We tend to assume they can understand language because humans can, right? Even young children can, so therefore must be easy. So we make these assumptions, and then we make assumptions about the depth of the intentionality of the machine, right? When actually a lot of these machines are just very simple. We assume they're much more complex than they are. We ascribe a lot more intelligence to them than would be appropriate.
So let's talk a little bit about the ethics around building these robots. And also, I watched your TED talk on the ethics of having chatbots that fool you into thinking that you're talking with a real human. And I automatically remembered something that I saw, I think it was a few years ago now, about the Google voice assistant or Google Assistant that could call a hairdresser and make an appointment for you. And it's completely 100% a robot, but it sounds exactly like a human, and it'll laugh in those awkward moments of silence even. And it never identifies itself as a robot.
Right.
And so that is where is there a line that should be drawn there? And I think that your take on it, how we don't know that this is a robot and it's collecting data on us, and that should not be okay, right? And so let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think, to just lay out what I think first, in my kind of position on this, I think that whenever we interact with a robotic system, it should be made very plain right at the outset that this is a robotic autonomous system, that this is a machine that we're interacting with, and that could easily be announced at the beginning of a phone call. Right, it's just very simply. Another way to cue that is that you have a deliberately robotic voice. This idea that we have to impersonate human voices, simulate human voices, it's not necessary for communication. We can have perfectly understandable easy to understand robotic type voices that makes it very plain that that's what we're dealing with. I don't think I think it's a problematic area to try and fool people into thinking that you're dealing with a human when you're not. As you say, because information may be disclosed, things may be, a person may behave very different. I would behave differently from you if we were just down the pub in the corner. We knew we weren't being recorded and so on. And not to say I would be ashamed of what I would say, but people behave in different ways in different situations. That's the way we interact socially. And I would not be happy if that was recorded and then stored forever and picked over 5 years later for exactly what it was I said about something.
Yeah, or
if nothing else, opinions and actually our ethics in society are moving very fast now, aren't they? So things which were unacceptable, for example, 6 or 7 years ago, plastic bags were not a big deal. But remember back before the COVID thing, if in January this year, I had turned up to the supermarket with a whole load of plastic bags, rather than using reusable things, people start looking, oh, look at that plastic bag use. So all of a sudden, plastic bags aren't a great idea. But they didn't used to be a bad idea, but now they're not such a great idea. So our determinations about what we think are right and wrong to be black and white, but just good and in those shades, just good and bad things, changes over time.
Yeah.
And so it's not a good idea, I don't think, to start recording people unless they know they're being recorded.
Yeah. And the whole
or gathering data on people unless they know that's happening.
Exactly, because later on, what happens or what could potentially happen is behind the scenes, there are algorithms being built on what you have said, or you have different kind of machine learning models that are being created and recommending you things for something that you said, not knowing it. And I know this is a big topic of debate on whether or not like the companies that be are listening to us on our phone when we're not using our phone, because sometimes you see like the Facebook, you may know this person, and you go, how do they know that I just met that person the other day? Or I was talking about a mountain bike the other day and now I'm seeing ads for it on Google. This is too creepy. And so those things really need to be addressed when we're being in communication with a robot, whether that is a voice assistant or a chatbot, because I know you mentioned that too. Chatbots are almost easier to fool you into thinking that you're dealing with a real human. And
text-based things. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's my first question whenever I go onto any chat system. I specifically ask the question, are you a human? Just type it in. And if they say, yeah, of course I am, blah, blah. Well, either they are or they're now lying to me. And if they're lying to me, then they're going to have a serious problem down track, aren't they?
Yeah.
If anything ever comes out from it. So I just asked that question,
And so when you speak about the need for innovation in this TED Talk, I was wondering, because you say we need to innovate, so you don't want to stifle innovation, but you want the right kind of innovation. And so in your eyes, what is the right kind of innovation?
Yeah, so as I kind of mentioned earlier, I think building machines that are intelligent and can do things that humans can't do is incredibly useful. We've been building machines that do things that humans can't do for a long time. Aircraft, mining equipment, satellites, loads of things. We're now adding a greater level of intelligence to those things and autonomy. And we can get enormous benefits from that. So we can do remote pipeline inspection of undersea pipes. We can do remote repairs of things. We can do surveys of fish in the sea. We can do all kinds of things in places where people just can't go, or it's very unsafe for people to go. Nuclear reactors, spent nuclear recovering. So there's big projects happening around the world now with designing robots to go into radioactive environments to help dismantle old nuclear reactors, for example.
Nice.
So it's incredibly useful stuff. And the requirements there are very specialist. If you sent an ordinary average robot in there, it would last 20 minutes and fry just like a person would, right? So there are ways to do that. So I think that's clearly an area where we can harness the benefit of this stuff, and there's very little ethical challenge there. It's good. On the other side, on the flip side, the idea of building purely social robots that interact with us purely for our entertainment and delivering those into homes, particularly targeting children with those socially aware, intelligent machines, I find that very problematic. They're not really solving any problem. They're just another means for entertainment. And as we know, entertainment is all about generating dopamine in humans, generating a need, ultimately generating a revenue stream for the people that provide those machines. So this is about making money. This is not about solving a human problem substantially.
Yeah, and
so I think those things are much more problematic. And as ethically responsible engineers, in fact, I tell my students, you should be thinking about the intended consequence and application of the technologies that you're developing. Even if you're working for an employer, you need to you still have individual responsibility about what should you be working on. And is this a good thing? Is this good for society to build this device which forms, well, a child might form a relationship with it. It doesn't really form a relationship with the child, but the child forms a relationship and believes there's a two-way relationship, and then the child wants new apps, new capabilities to be added to this thing, and so there's a revenue stream that happens there.
well,
I find that problematic.
It sounds a bit like stepping up from your classic teddy bear. It's the next level of your teddy bear. And then, I mean, I could see the reverse side that, hey, we're doing this already with kids and their teddy bears, and they're just inventing the story or the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I do.
That's good, isn't it? That's fostering their creativity, their imagination. There's not an ongoing revenue stream. You bought the teddy bear. The teddy bear is what it is. It's not an internet connected teddy bear. It's not harvesting data off the child
to be able to sell you better.
It's not providing in-app purchases. It's just a teddy bear.
Yeah.
So I think there's a fundamental difference. We're not just enhancing a teddy bear a bit and making a smart bear.
Yeah.
It's like a smart speaker. It's very clever to call it a smart speaker, but it's not. It's a robot.
Yeah. It sounds
it's not a smart speaker.
It's much easier for us to digest if it's a smart speaker, right? Marketing does a great job with that. So this is fascinating to me because I really look at the future and I think, well, the money that is potentially behind these smart teddy bears is going to be a driving factor. And so how can you not let that happen without stifling the free market of people being able to invent what they want? Do you put regulations on toys, smart toys? Do you put regulations on certain sectors of society where you say, hey, look, these are off limits?
Yeah, so we exist at the moment in a very highly regulated space already. So you can't just build any old bridge. There has to be a bridge built according to a whole range of standards and certifications and designs, and the design process itself is very highly regulated, right? You can't build. We don't build bridges and then find that some of them fall down. Bridges can't fall down, right? Something terrible's happened if a bridge. They don't, and they don't because they're built in a very rigorous way, conforming to standards and regulations and so on. So, and same with the drugs industry, right? We don't just generate some drugs, throw them out there and see how people get on with them. And then if there's a problem, we do something. There's a huge amount of testing and procedure and process, regulation and so on, and oversight. So and I could go on and on, right? I won't bore you, but there's a whole range of regulations when we in order to be able to sell any product, if any electrical product, to make sure it doesn't catch fire, that it doesn't give off any toxic fumes, that if it fails in a safe way, etc., etc. So there's lots of regulations in all areas of manufacturing industry and commerce as well, right? So you've got your 14-day money back guarantee. People, it's not a Wild West. It's not a Wild West. But in the software industry, it still is a bit of a wild west. People think they can just build whatever they want and shove it out there on a web browser and see how people get on with it. And if it harms some people, oh, we're terribly sorry. That wasn't our intention, and we'll make some changes. And that's what you see. You see these very, very rich senior executives of major corporations providing some of our technology, and those are the kind of statements they make. Oh, we just had the best intentions in mind, etc., etc. So I think that society needs to decide that we need to come up with some standards. We need to come up with some oversight, and we need some regulations.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And it is one of those.
Why would they think that they're exempt from it?
Yeah.
No one else is exempt from it.
Well, so do you?
I have a friend who makes hair dryers. He has to conform to a whole lot of regulations. Why would you not have to if you make software?
Yeah, and especially as software becomes such an integral part of our life.
Yeah.
And so, do you see it as like a third-party auditing certification that needs to come in and do oversight? And would that be a private or public?
Yeah, so I mean, we're kind of right on the cutting edge here, but in Europe they have a thing called the High Level Expert Group, Artificial Intelligence, that advises the EU, and they've come up with a tool called ALTAI, ALTAI, and this is a self-assessment tool. So essentially, you go through and you ask a good range of quite detailed questions about the processes that you've used for building your AI system, where you've got the data from. What have you considered a whole range of things: bias, inclusivity, accessibility, a whole range of things. And what are your design processes? Do you have a good audit trail for all of the data? Do you know the provenance of all of your data? Do you know when it was captured and exactly what group of people were used to capture that data, etc., and so on. And you end up and you build actually a spider chart, and the bigger the area in your spider chart on 7 axes, the I guess the bigger the area, in some sense, the more compliant you are to the principles that have been set out along these 7 axes. And I think that's great as far as it goes, but I do think it's very difficult for individuals not to be biased themselves when they answer the questions about their own projects. And so this would be a much more rigorous process if it were conducted by someone external, someone suitably qualified, some external auditor who's done this before, and can also benchmark you against other companies and so on. And that's really where I think we need to go. And that's not a new idea. So I ran a software company, and for many years that software company, we were accredited with ISO 9001, which is the standard, international standard for software development, right? And it's all about quality standards. So it's all about processes and having the right documentation in place, but also being able to demonstrate at audit that you've been through a whole set of steps and that you've recorded information at each step in the process. And overall, this improves the quality of your software. So it's slightly different when we bring data into the equation, because we're not just looking at the quality of the software, we're now looking at the provenance of your data and how you've processed that data and so on. So if you're doing machine learning, then something like that is really what you would want to see from a company.
Yeah, and I think that would raise a whole lot of issues with how did you gather this data? And that needs to be very clear so that people are okay with it. And we are making these machine learning models that are ethical in a way.
Yeah. Well, the GDPR now, the European General Data Protection Regulations, now specify that when you collect data, you have to specify the purpose for which you're collecting it. So people need to be aware, that needs to be transparent. Why are you collecting this information? And you must only use it for those purposes. So you're not supposed to take that data and then use it for some other purpose. To train a model in order to use it for some other purpose. You're not supposed to repurpose people's data. And again, whether we've done that or not needs to be you can determine that by audit.
Yeah, it seems like the way to go and the future. I think that needs to happen soon or now, right? Because like you said, and I deal a lot with the machine learning community, and it is the wild, wild west right now. There's no regulations. There's nothing really in place. You have some things that are happening in fintech, and that's where it feels like the majority of the regulations are. But if someone wanted to go out tomorrow and build this teddy bear that we speak of, they could.
Yep.
And
As long as it didn't catch fire, you certainly could do
yeah,
that. Yeah.
so there's no kind of there's no oversight on that, and it definitely needs to be more of a talking point. And I think that's why we're here, and we want to raise these
hmm
issues. We want to bring this up so that not only people in this circle they understand it, but also people that maybe are interested in these fields or interested in what is going on with ethics and AI, they can
Yeah.
also have a better idea of where we are right now. And this is, to put it bluntly, we're not really in the best place at the moment. So that being said, let's try and end on a nice note. Do you feel that there in this muttering robots, and as we evolve with robotics all around us, what are you excited about? I know you talked about using tools and having robotics as tools and basically building another layer that we've been using, like the industrial revolution that we had. Do you foresee another revolution with these robotics that we're going to have, or is there anything else that you feel is very interesting to be looking into as we move forward?
What we haven't talked about is the fascinating field of soft robotics, building very compliant machines. So this is machines that are made out of a silicone rubber, often fluid powered or pneumatically powered. Um, building machines that are very compliant, by which I mean, like we're able to, human bodies are very able to take shock. And so we don't need to precisely position ourselves around an object in order to pick it up. We just kind of push our hand towards an object and pull these strings here in our tendons, and our hand kind of, and it just compliantly closes around the object. As long as we don't squeeze too hard, we won't break the egg. So you don't have to compute a precise grip in order to pick something up. And we can do that because we are so squishy. And I think there's a huge opportunity. I mean, there are sort of pilot projects and small commercial things looking at doing that. But I had one of my students last year. We made a great project. It was a robot that would pick things up. It would pick up anything, and it had very little computational intelligence in it. It had what we would call morphological intelligence. The intelligence was in the design of the artifact, right? So what we had was a balloon filled with coffee granules. And what you do is you push the balloon over whatever the thing is you want to pick up. Doesn't matter what it is. You suck the air out, and it grips this thing very firmly. You pick it up. And we could pick up, a half-liter Coke bottle or a tiny little screw with exactly the same end effector. So that was amazing. And then you just, when you want to let go of it, you just let the air back into the balloon. And this end effector costs what? Almost nothing. It was a balloon and some coffee granules, instant coffee granules. So that's about trying to think of smart morphological solutions to solve problems. Your listeners might be interested in the Strand Beast. Go and look up Strand Beast. These are machines that can walk along a beach with legs, and they have only morphological intelligence. There's no power source. There's no electrical actuation in them, but just because of design. So I think that's something, and that's not really my specialist field, right? That's more your mechanical engineers that do that work. But I think that's fascinating, and they'll benefit from a lot of new materials that are coming on, right? So the material scientists are designing much better materials, much tougher materials that are still compliant to be able to do that and get away from these rigid metal multi-jointed robots.
It's fascinating.
So that's one thing. Yeah. I think probably machine learning is we can argue where it is at the moment, but I think in the end it'll be like most technologies. It's an S curve. It's the bottom part of it looks exponential, and then it tends to flatten out. And we will not build complex action selection systems for robots just using current machine learning techniques. I've had projects with students looking at that, and so are very large companies like Google and so on, right? And we need something else. So I think there's going to be a move back towards symbolic processing, okay, and much more human design. Machine learning and learning from data is a very important part of artificial intelligence, but it's not the only part. And the other guys have been waiting in the wings for a long time. They haven't had much funding, they haven't had much interest. But the guys who are interested in building symbol-based systems are ready to go, really. And I'd like to see more investment and more interest in those approaches to build hybrid machines.
Can you explain a bit more about that? What is symbol-based? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, so the idea is that you, when you look in the code, you actually see symbols that are moving around. When you look inside a neural network, you've just got weights and biases and lots of maths happening, right? You've just got numbers being crunched together. In a symbolic-based architecture, you have things which are understandable to humans, right? Like if you look at the instinct planner that I designed based on Professor Bryson's POSH environment, you actually have the idea of drives, so things that a robot wants to get done. You have actions, you have competencies, right? Things that a robot is able to do, and those things are programmed. So those are symbolic things. Humans can understand them, and the machine is processing symbols, moving things around inside the environment in order to get work done. And you can express knowledge semantically as well, in meaningful blocks of information, which we might call, which could be in the form of kind of language, human language, but could also be just other blocks of information that have meaning.
Okay.
So there's been a lot of work being done on that in the past, but it's kind of not been heavily invested. Certainly not in the many billions of dollars that have been invested in machine learning to achieve what we have in machine learning. So machine learning is fantastic for lots of things: image processing, object recognition,
recommender systems.
Recommender systems, persuader systems, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, but in going back to these kind of the robot environment, it's not great for action selection, and so that's really that's where I'm looking for the next breakthrough. Really
brilliant. Yeah. Well, I love talking to you, Rob. I have one last question, and it is: are you a robot?
I guess you ask all of your speakers that question, right? It depends what you define robot, of course. That's the question. I'm a living organism, and I'm evolved, and I am unique, and therefore I don't think I'm a robot. No, for those three reasons.
There you go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. I really appreciate you sitting down with me and enlightening me on so many different topics. It has been an incredible chat. And if anyone wants to continue the conversation with you, is there a way to reach out? Are you active on the social networks or Twitter? Or
yeah, so I'm Rob Wortham on Twitter. You'll find me there. I have a website, robwortham.com, and there's a bunch of content on there, and you can contact me through there or have a look at the various stuff that I put together on there. So yeah, that's a couple of ways you can get hold of me. Yeah.
Great. All right, everyone. Have a really nice day. We will see you later.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.